Welcome to episode 10 of Shane Talks 99. It's 10 episodes in a row. And we got another trifecta of genres to talk about this week. So we're going to get into it with probably one of the worst films of 1999. I know I talk about how great 1999 is all the time, but I mean, the first movie, it's pretty bad. After that, we're going to follow it up with a Clint Eastwood flick, and then we're going to wrap it up with one of my favorite rom-coms of 1999. And oddly, it's not even one of the teenage rom-coms, but it is one of my favorite movies from this year, and it does star Ben Affleck, so kind of gives it a little extra push for me. So that worst film of one of the worst films in 1999 that I'm going to talk about. It's a movie called Ravenous, and it's a bad movie, but when I rewatched it this week, it wasn't. I was impressed that I didn't hate the movie as much as I thought I did back then. I still laughed at how terrible this plot is. The acting is bad. The editing is bad in this movie. But it's really not that bad of a movie. And it sucks because this flick has an amazing cast that just weren't used. They weren't used properly to make this movie what it had the potential to be. I was fresh off of falling in love with Guy Pearce. In '97, he did L.A. Confidential. I think this was his first movie after L.A. Confidential. I can't remember if he did anything in '98. So I was really looking forward to this film just because it was Guy Pearce doing something else, and it was bad. Luckily, next year in 2000, he makes up for everything when he does the film Memento. One of the other leads in this movie is Robert Carlisle. He's the main antagonist, and he does this Wendigo vampire character like to perfection. He's suave, but also insane at the same time. And it's decent acting from him. Just he's given a terrible script that kind of makes you laugh at some of his deliveries and some of the ways he was directed. Again, like he could have been directed so much better, and just like slightly different choices could have been made. And this movie wouldn't have been as bad as it was. As far as Robert Carlisle goes, we got two more movies to talk about him in 1999. This was kind of one of his first big years in Hollywood with this movie. He was also in the James Bond film, The World Is Not Enough, and then he's also in Angela's Ashes this year. So both of those, pretty sure they're November, December releases that we'll get around to talking about. Jeremy Davies is in this cast, kind of at the beginning of his career. Recently on the regular Shane Talks podcast, we talked about the movie Going All the Way. It was set here in Indiana, written by Dan Wakefield, and then filmed at local establishments here in Indianapolis. It starred him and Ben Affleck. That just came out in 1997. Then in 1998, he was in Saving Private Ryan. And I mean, like later on in his career, he became huge with stuff like Lost and Justified. David Arquette is in this cast. He had just done Scream 1 and 2. He's getting ready to do Scream 3 in 2000. And like, he's not a huge character in this movie, but they perfectly cast him as this because his character is just kind of insane and kind of goofy and ridiculous. And again, that doesn't help making this a horror film. I didn't remember until I watched it that Neil McDonough is in this movie really early in his career. Every time I watch Angels in the Outfield now, that's one of his first movie roles. It's crazy to see him there because obviously when I was 13 years old, I didn't know who he was. He was also in Star Trek First Contact before this. After this movie, it took 3 years for him to do another Hollywood movie, and that was Minority Report, which was the first time that I remember seeing him in a movie. Lastly, I unfortunately have to address this. The cast does feature an actor named Jeffrey Jones. Jeffrey Jones is a dude that growing up, he was a huge part of my childhood because he did a lot of movies that I grew up loving. He was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off as the principal, and he is iconic in that role. Then he was in Howard the Duck, Beetlejuice. I love the movie Stay Tuned that he was in. He was also a small part in The Hunt for Red October. But I say it's unfortunate to bring him up because in 2003, he was convicted of soliciting nude photographs from a 14-year-old boy, and essentially then was caught with child pornography. And that just, it sucks because that like tarnishes his career for me. Because in the same way that I can't look at Bill Cosby the same way because of what he did, like the stuff that Jeffrey Jones did kind of just makes me like just not enjoy him as a person anymore. So sucks for him. This movie obviously came out 4 years before all that stuff came to light, but whatever. So Ravenous is supposed to be this like horror movie. And like I get this like horror attempted vibe that they were going for, but it was kind of like recently. Oh, I say recently, and I think it was like 5 or 7 years ago. There was a movie called The Witch that came out. It was the first time I'd ever seen Anna Taylor-Joy in a movie. That was called a horror movie, and I literally wasn't scared of anything that happened in that movie. Same thing with Ravenous. Like they they do things like the opening credits of Ravenous are something you would have seen in Scream. Like every time somebody's name slid onto the screen, there was like the slashing sound of a knife along with it. It was very weird opening credits, very like wanting to be a horror slasher film, but it wasn't. The material isn't terrible, but a lot of the actors went like way over the top with their performances, or just they were directed very weirdly. The movie, obviously I understand why it flops because it was not well done, but it's not a bad movie. If you've listened to this podcast, if you listen to any Shane Talk stuff, I'm super anti remakes. There are very few remakes that I like or enjoy. The majority of the time, I get pretty upset about it, especially if it's something I grew up with that's getting remade now. This movie is literally the only thing that I think if I heard, if I picked up the Hollywood Reporter and they were like, Ravenous is being remade, reimagined, brought up to modern day. Like, I mean, I don't know if you'd really bring it up to modern day since kind of the like mythology of, being out in the, the West when it was still becoming the West was a thing. If they announced that they were remaking Ravenous, I'd actually be okay with that and interested in it because the concept and idea of the Wendigo, which is, shares a lot of characteristics with a vampire in the fact that they, eat the cannibalism part, eating people to absorb their powers and things like that. Like it's not a terrible concept as far as the movie goes. It just is terribly put together. And one thing that definitely did not help this production is there was a dude that was supposed to direct this movie. I don't remember his name. But he complained extensively that Fox 2000 was micromanaging the production. It got all the way up to the first scheduled week of filming, and Fox 2000 actually ended up replacing him because at that point, they still hadn't agreed to a budget or a complete filming schedule or anything like that. Apparently, the director was refusing to sit down with the producers. He just wanted to go make his movie. They weren't, down for that. So they came in the first week, they fired him, and then they brought in Raja Gusnell. Raja Gusnell was the editor of the film Home Alone, and he would go on to direct the 1999 film Never Been Kissed that we'll eventually talk about. But when they brought in Raja, the rumors are that the cast did not like him and did not want to work with him. So they were very, I don't know what the right word would be. They didn't make the production easy once Raja Gusnell came on board. So I don't think he was around for very long before Robert Carlisle convinced the studio to bring in a collaborator that he had done 2 movies with in Britain, and her name is Antonia Bird. She had just a couple of years early in 1997 done the movie Mad Love with Chris O'Donnell and Drew Barrymore. So she kind of had a foot into the Hollywood door coming over from England. But even after that, in 98, she went back to England and made another movie with Robert Carlisle. So very, very small Hollywood footprint that Robert Carlisle got her this directing job. And I put some blame on her, but all this stuff with 3 different directors going on and like, just, I don't know her reasoning for some of the performances she got out of these people, but it did not work well for the movie. So if there's ever going to be a Hollywood remake that I'm actually excited for, this is it. Ravenous would be it. Next, we're going to move on to Clint Eastwood's 1999 entry, and that is a movie called True Crime. He starred in it. He directed it, and he also was a producer on the movie. He was 69 years old. I mean, the dude's like, I don't know, 93, 92 right now, maybe 91. I don't know if he's had his birthday yet this year, but the dude is still making movies and was still making movies at 69 years old and taking on directing duties at that point. So he's a journalist in the movie, and two of his one's his boss. Well, I guess they're both technically his boss at the newspaper that he's working for. His coworkers are played by James Woods and Dennis Leary, and the three of them have some absolutely amazing scenes together. There's specifically one scene just between Woods and Eastwood. It literally sounds like David Mamet wrote it, and I mean, could have potentially directed it also, because like the dialogue is so quick and back and forth, and they're just, you know, throwing stabs at each other, but you can also tell that there's friendship behind it. They actually do care about each other, but like one of them is talking shit to the other one, so the other one is talking shit back. It's very, very fun to watch a scene like that. Dennis Leary is Dennis Leary. He gets to, you know, use the F word a lot, so I enjoy Dennis Leary in this film. The death row inmate that's involved in true crime is played by Isaiah Washington. Before Isaiah Washington did this movie, he was in a lot of Spike Lee joints throughout the 90s. Really, really cool dude. After true crime, he ended up going on to do 2 films with DMX. He was in Romeo Must Die, and he was also in Exit Wounds. So really, really good point in his career right now in the 90s. Isaiah Washington is a phenomenal actor, and his acting is really showcased in this movie. Playing a death row inmate, dealing with his wife and his daughter on the last day of his life. Very powerful, and he's so respectful to all the guards, and like he does an amazing job acting in this film. There's also a very small, I say cameo, but she just has a very small character at the beginning of the film that's played by Mary McCormick, an actress that I really am fond of. I really like a lot of the work that she's done. Later this year in 1999, we will get to talk a lot about her in the film Mystery Alaska, where she plays Russell Crowe's wife. Just so happens this movie, she just has a tiny little, like maybe 5-minute at most scene. So the plot of true crime is that it's the last day in the life of a death row inmate before he's going to be given the lethal injection. Clint Eastwood ends up playing the reporter who gets assigned to cover like his last day. Like obviously it's been covered in the newspapers and stuff like that, you know, up before now, but like they want stuff on the last day that he is alive. While Clint Eastwood goes, you know, back to the site of the murder and starts talking to people and like starts talking to some of the witnesses from back then, he's starting to see that stuff's just not adding up completely. And so he's convinced that this guy is innocent, and he's doing everything he can in these last few hours of this guy's life to at least get the governor to say, you might be right. This guy might be innocent. Let's not actually kill him tonight. It's a decent plot. I enjoyed it. As somebody who watches a lot of true crime documentaries and shows, my wife and I watch a lot of them together. It's a tough script sell for me. Specifically because like this lethal injection is taking place 6 years after the murder. There are people that are caught red-handed murdering people that still get enough appeals to last 20 or 30 years before they even come close to actually getting the death penalty on them. But as a Hollywood mystery goes, it's decent. But any real life version of this, there would have been a detective that would have found all these pieces that Clint Eastwood ends up finding, you know, on the last day of this guy's life. At one point, when they're talking about how it's only been 6 years, my wife looked over at me because she actually ended up watching most of this movie with me. She missed the start of it and sat down and watched the end of the last 2 hours of the movie with me. She looked over at me at one point and said, "That's not enough time for him to go through all of his appeals." And I just kind of looked at her and I nodded that she was right. And she goes, "But that's the speed of plot." If you've ever listened to Jason and I, we use that term speed of plot a lot. I've got my wife now saying the speed of plot. It literally just means that when something needs to happen for the story, no matter how ridiculous or dumb it is, you just write it and you hope that the audience goes along with it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Again, speed of plot is how we got to look at this movie. The reveal as far as speed of plot goes, the reveal of how Clint Eastwood figures out that he is innocent is really cool, and it's something that you can catch if you've seen the movie. I had forgotten what it was until like the scene before he catches it, and maybe like 2 or 3 scenes before he catches it. I was like, oh yeah, that's the piece that he connects everything together with. So, like I said, well written and done Hollywood mystery, but just not completely like logical and realistic. As far as the film looks, the mise en scène that Clint Eastwood and his DP used for this movie makes the film look really nice. And it honestly kind of made me feel like I was watching like a 70s film, because they do a lot of these really nice 2 shots that have beautiful like San Francisco backgrounds behind them. Like lots of water and then like houses on the other side of the water. It's obvious that they were filming on location for a lot of this stuff and just not using sound stages with a backdrop or anything like that. So it makes the film look super nice to me. Now, my only complaint about the movie, and it's something I almost always complain about anytime I talk about something that Clint Eastwood has directed, Clint Eastwood doesn't know how to tighten a movie up. Clint Eastwood has his director's cut version of a movie. Like, you know, a lot of directors, you get like Terminator 2 comes out, and then James Cameron gets the director's cut of Terminator 2. Or, I mean, we can use The Abyss, also James Cameron. The Abyss comes out in movie theaters. But then later, James Cameron gets to release his director's cut of The Abyss. I'm convinced that every movie that Clint Eastwood releases is just his director's cut, and nobody is willing to tell him he needs to cut stuff down. Because the movies, I think it's only literally like 2 hours and 7 minutes long, but it feels so much longer than that. There's so many subplots going on. There's so many scenes that don't need to be involved in this movie. Or if you cut a subplot out, you're cutting out 10 minutes of the movie. If you were to be able to cut true crime down to a 1 hour and 40-minute movie, I feel like the pacing would be a lot better, and I'd really enjoy the movie a lot more. As it is, it's a good movie. It's a great entry in Clint Eastwood's repertoire. Even though I did read that at the time that this came out, I don't know if this has changed, that this was his lowest rated film that he had ever released. So that's kind of disappointing, because overall, I do really enjoy it, especially Isaiah Washington's performance. He kind of like he carries the bulk of the like emotion of the movie, while Clint Eastwood's character is, you know, who you're following while he's doing all this stuff. Isaiah Washington's character actually, like, you feel his emotion when he's doing things. So if they would just cut it out and not let Clint Eastwood direct like 3-hour epics, I'd probably enjoy Clint Eastwood a lot more than I do. And now for our last movie this week, we are talking about Forces of Nature, the Ben Affleck and Sandra Bullock rom-com that is seriously one of my favorite rom-coms, not even just because it's from 1999, but just I'm obviously a big Ben Affleck character. Sandra Bullock, or I apologize, Ben Affleck as a character is somebody that I am a huge fan of. If you've ever listened to any Shane Talks podcast, I rave and rant about everything that Ben Affleck has done. I feel like I grew up with his career. He's only a couple years older than me, so when stuff like Good Will Hunting was coming out, and when he was doing Chasing Amy and things like that, like I was age appropriate to like see myself in a lot of the characters that he did. Not in Shannon Hamilton, not Shannon Hamilton from Mallrats, but many of his other characters, I definitely saw myself, you know, latching onto him and how he portrayed his characters. Then you've got Sandra Bullock in this movie. And I'm going to be honest, I already had a crush on Sandra Bullock because she did Demolition Man. She did Speed. I love her character in The Net. It's an amazing film. But this just sent that crush like skyrocketing. In this movie, her character has a purple streak in her hair. And you couple that purple streak with another 1999 movie we're going to discuss in the fall called Drive Me Crazy. Ali Larter's character in that film also had a purple streak in her hair, and like both of these movies, 1999, purple streak in a girl's hair, like it hit me. It's been something that I have found mega attractive ever since then because of these two characters from 1999, and like it just Sandra Bullock's free-spirited character in this movie, like she has a lot of baggage. She kind of, you know, suppresses it and like puts on an outward appearance of being like this happy-go-lucky character. peeling back the layers of that onion throughout the course of this story is just something that I really like about the movie. Other characters in this movie, we've got Moira Tierney, who plays Ben Affleck's fiance. She is who he's traveling down to Florida, I believe. They're from New York. He's traveling to Florida for their wedding when his whole plane, trains, and automobiles fiasco begins for him. Later this year, we're going to talk about Moira Tierney again when she is involved in the extremely disappointing film Instinct. I want to say that's a June release. I remember it coming out right around my birthday. Another character we got is Steve Zahn, plays Ben Affleck's best man in the movie. Steve Zahn, 2 more movies coming out in 1999 for us to talk about. First up is Happy Texas, and then he was a voice in Stuart Little. I think he was a voice in Stuart Little. I don't remember him acting in it, but I could be wrong about that. He is in Stuart Little. But Steve Zahn, like, his career he's in the middle of a takeoff right now, because he started in Reality Bites, and then he was in Crimson Tide and had a huge part in That Thing You Do. He was also in Out of Sight and You've Got Mail. And then it just keeps going from there. A couple of years later, him and Paul Walker are going to be in Joyride together with Lily Sobieski. So Steve Zahn's career, very, very much in the upward trajectory at this point. Now, one of the things that really attracts me to Forces of Nature is the fact that around 1999 was the time that I was getting into a lot of different kinds of storytelling. I watched the movie Chasing Amy for the first time in 1999. And something that young Shane learned about storytelling at that time is that couples that you like, they aren't always going to end up together, and that's okay. This exact type of storytelling is what I would later use when I wrote and directed my feature-length film Reunion in 2004. I used the idea that there are sometimes 2 characters that are written that you really want them to be together and you really like their chemistry, but the realities of the world just keep those characters apart, and that's okay. Sometimes 2 people aren't actually meant to be together. So, throughout the course of this film, I, as a viewer, want Ben Affleck to leave his fiance. I want him to end up with Sandra Bullock. They build up a great chemistry between the 2 of them throughout the course of this. And you get all the way down to that final scene where you literally think he's going to show up at the wedding and back out. And then that just doesn't happen. As much as they built up between the 2 of them, when Ben Affleck sees his fiance, he realizes that's who he wants to be with. That's who he should be with. And, Sandra Bullock's character makes the same decision, that she's like, I'm not going to stick around because he's not supposed to be with me. I like that. I think it's good. I think it works really well. I think Ben Affleck made the right choice for the character at that moment, as much as I, as the viewer, wanted him to be with Sandra Bullock's character. The only blah part that I have with the movie is Ben Affleck and Sandra Bullock do have a moment where they are about to have sex, and then Ben Affleck, not being with his fiance for the lead up to the wedding, she kind of falls into the trap of an old boyfriend who's still in love with her, and they do some questionable stuff. And again, I understand the use of it for the storytelling aspect of it, but it's kind of a bummer. And I understand how contradictory that kind of is when I'm saying that I want him to end up with Sandra Bullock, but I also just don't enjoy the fact that he comes close to actually cheating on his wife. So that's a little touchy with the plot, but it is what it is. So this film, to this day, still sticks around with me. I watched it 2 years ago when I was doing my 1999 rewatches. Watched it again this week. It's available on Hulu if you haven't seen it or want to watch it. It might actually also be on Paramount Plus. I feel like at one point I saw it on there also, but I watched it on Hulu this week. So yeah, that is March 18th of 1999. Those are the flicks that we had if you were going out to the movie theater this week. I hope you would have picked Forces of Nature, because it was definitely the best thing that came out that week. Next week, we have Doug's first movie, which I have never been a Doug fan. I never watched it on Nickelodeon, so it will be my first time seeing this movie if I find it to watch this week. We have Ed TV, which is kind of like a different version of The Truman Show. It could be considered a similar plot to The Truman Show, except that Ed knows that he's being filmed, as opposed to The Truman Show, he didn't know he was, a TV star. I remember watching that 2 years ago, and it was a lot different than I remembered it. But it didn't stick with me, so I'm going to need to try to find it this week again and watch it again. And then we've got the Mod Squad, the remake of the 70s TV show, which I remember thinking was okay. I like the cast. Giovanni Ribisi, Omar Epps, and Claire Danes, I believe, is the cast. I'm looking forward to rewatching that. It's been a long time. I think I've caught it on TV a few times, and it's just been okay. Very 90s, nostalgic for me. But I need to watch the whole movie again this week so that I can talk about it next week. Thanks for listening this week, guys. That was March 18th of 1999.